She fainted before the vampire king. He caught her, saw the bruises, and said, "Who hurt you?" The heavy oak doors of the obsidian court did not creak. They groaned, as if the castle itself was in pain. Rain lashed against the stained glass, mimicking the chaotic rhythm of her failing heart. Quiel didn't belong here. She was a creature of sunlight and servitude, a fugitive bleeding out on a floor polished to a mirror shine. She saw him then. Not a man, but a stillness in the center of the storm. Fenwick Hollowmere, the vampire king. He turned, his eyes like fractured amethysts. As darkness took her, she felt arms like marble catch her fall, and a voice, low and trembling with a lethal fury, whispered, "Who hurt you?" Pain was a color, and for Quiel it was a blinding, nauseating white that pulsed behind her eyes with every faltering step. She had been running for 3 days. The soles of her boots were worn through to the skin, leaving a bloody, frantic half-moons on the frozen earth of the borderlands. Every breath was a negotiation with her burning lungs, the air tasting of iron and impending snow. Behind her lay the Stoneheart estate, a place of jagged iron fences and dogs that were starved until they were mad. Ahead lay the gloom, the sovereign territory of the vampires, a land of perpetual twilight and silent predators. Humans did not cross into the gloom. To do so was to trade a quick death for a slow one. But Quiel knew that Garin Stoneheart was behind her, his horse's hooves thundering in her mind like a migraine that wouldn't fade. Garin didn't kill quickly. He liked to play with his food, to strip away hope, layer by layer, until only terror remained. Given the choice between a vampire's clean bite and Garin's barbed whip, Quiel chose the bite. She crested the ridge, her legs trembling violently. Below, the obsidian court rose from the mist like a jagged tooth of black rock, defying gravity and logic. Spires twisted into the sky like frozen smoke, and the windows glowed with a cold, spectral light. It was terrifying, magnificent, and silent. She stumbled. Her ankle, already swollen and purple, gave way with a sickening crunch. She rolled down the incline, tearing her dress on briars that seemed to grab at her like skeletal fingers, tearing at the fresh wounds on her back. She landed hard against a massive iron gate. It was unlocked. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. Or perhaps a trap was simply waiting to be sprung. Quiel pushed the gate open. It swung soundlessly on oiled hinges. She limped into the courtyard. There were no guards, no gargoyles coming to life to snatch her, just an oppressive silence and the scent of ozone, ancient stone, and something sweet, like night-blooming jasmine masking the scent of copper. She needed sanctuary. She needed to hide. She found the great doors ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling out onto the wet stones. Delirium was setting in now. The loss of blood from the lash marks on her back was taking its toll, turning the world grey at the edges. She pushed inside, expecting a dungeon or a guard room. Instead, she stumbled into a ballroom. It was vast, a cavern of shadows and velvet, lit by thousands of floating candles that dripped wax, that vanished before it hit the obsidian floor. And it was occupied. Dozens of them. Tall, pale, impossibly beautiful creatures clad in velvet and silk, the color of midnight, blood and bruising. The court was in session. They froze as she entered, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air from the room. The music, a melancholic string quartet, screeched to a halt. At the far end, upon a throne carved from a single piece of volcanic glass, sat a man. He was leaning back, bored, a goblet of wine dangling dangerously from long, pale fingers. He wore a tunic of charcoal silk, left open at the collar, revealing skin that looked like it had never known the warmth of the sun, alabaster, flawless, cold His hair was the color of raven feathers, falling messily over eyes that were startlingly violet. A deep, glowing purple. Fenwick Hollowmere, king of the gloom. He looked up, and the boredom vanished, replaced by a predator's sharp interest. Quiel tried to speak, to beg for asylum, to scream, but her throat was dry as dust. She took a step forward, her muddy boot squeaking on the pristine floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Help!" she mouthed. But no sound came. Her legs simply ceased to exist. The floor rushed up to meet her. This is it, she thought, watching the candlelight blur into streaks of fire. I die here. She didn't hit the floor. She hit something solid and cold. A scent enveloped her. Not the rot of death she expected, but petrichor, cedar, and something metallic, like a sword just pulled from a scabbard. She blinked, her vision tunneling. The king was holding her. He had moved across the vast room in the space of a heartbeat, a blur of shadow and speed. He was looking down at her, and up close, he was terrifying. His face was a map of sharp angles and unnatural perfection, his skin cool against her feverish cheek. His gaze dropped to her shoulder, where her torn dress revealed a fresh, weeping welt in the shape of a signet ring. Garen's ring. The flesh around it was black and veined with poison. The king's pupils blew wide, swallowing the iris. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees instantly. The candles flickered violently, some snuffing out completely. "Who hurt you?" It wasn't a question. It was a sentence, a declaration of war. Kiel's lips moved, but the darkness was pulling her under. She saw the other vampires backing away, fear etched onto their immortal faces. They weren't afraid of the intruder. They were afraid of him. "Garen," she managed to whisper, the name tasting like ash and bile. "Stoneheart." The king looked up, his eyes locking on the open doors where the sound of baying hounds had just begun to drift in from the night. He pulled her closer against his chest, heedless of the mud and blood staining his expensive silk. His grip was iron, possessive and protective. "Hail," the king said. His voice was soft, terrifyingly calm, vibrating through his chest and into hers. A massive vampire in silver armor stepped out of the shadows, his hand already on the hilt of a great sword. "My liege?" "Close the gates," Fenwick Hollowmere said, his eyes never leaving Quiel's fading face. "If anything living crosses that threshold, kill it." Slowly. Then he looked back down at her. His expression softened, a crack in the marble mask. "Sleep, little bird. You are in the hawk's nest now." And for the first time in her life, Quiel felt safe enough to let the darkness take her. As Quiel loses consciousness, she sees Fenwick's hand tighten on her arm. His fingernails elongate into talons, but instead of piercing her skin, they turn black, absorbing the poison that was lacing the wound on her shoulder. He shudders as he draws the toxin into himself, his eyes flashing green for a split second, a color that shouldn't exist in a vampire. Waking up was a disappointment. Quiel had hoped for the void, for the endless silence of the grave. Instead, she woke up to the smell of lavender, old parchment, and the crackle of a dying fire. She shot up, gasping, air rushing into her lungs like a physical blow. Immediately she regretted it. Her back screamed in protest, but the sharp, stinging agony she expected was gone. In its place was a dull, throbbing ache, deep in the bone. She looked around wildly. She was in a bed large enough to sleep a family of 4, drowning in furs that were softer than anything she had ever touched. White wolf, silver fox, velvet thick enough to stop a knife. The room was circular, a sanctuary of stone and glass. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a landscape of jagged peaks and mist-filled valleys. It was night. It was always night here. The moon hung low and heavy, a pale eye watching her. "You're awake? Good. I owe Noravane 5 gold coins. She bet you wouldn't last the hour." Quiel scrambled backward, pressing herself against the carved headboard, dragging the furs up to her chin. Sitting in a velvet armchair by the fireplace was the king. He was reading a leather-bound book, his legs crossed comfortably at the ankles. He had changed his clothes. The blood-soaked silk was gone, replaced by a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His forearms were distractingly human, sinewy, pale, dusted with dark hair, but they looked like they were carved from marble. "Where am I?" Kiel rasped. Her voice sounded like broken glass. "The East Tower," Fenwick said, turning a page. He didn't look up. "My private quarters. The guest rooms were dusty, and Merelda, my housekeeper, is terrified of you." "Terrified of me?" Quiel looked at her hands. They were scrubbed clean, the grime of her 3-day run gone. Her fingernails were no longer black with dirt. "I'm a human, a runaway servant. Why would a vampire fear me? You are a human who crashed a vampiric court session, bled on my ancestral floors, and survived a dose of wolfsbane that would have killed a battalion of soldiers." Fenwick closed the book with a sharp snap that echoed in the quiet room. He stood up. Quiel flinched. It was a reflex, a muscle memory carved into her by years of living under Garen Stoneheart's roof. A sudden movement meant pain. Fenwick froze. He watched her reaction, his violet eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't approach her. Instead, he walked to a small table with deliberate slowness and poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe. He set it on the nightstand, then retreated to the fireplace, leaning his arm against the stone mantel. "Drink," he commanded softly. Then, seeing her hesitation, a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "If I wanted to drain you, I would have done it while you were unconscious. I prefer my meals lively, and I do not drink from the broken." Quiel stared at him for a heartbeat, then snatched the glass. Her hand shook, spilling water down her chin and onto the expensive furs. She drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. "Why am I alive?" she asked, lowering the glass. "You kill trespassers. Everyone knows that." "Because you said a name," Fenwick said, watching the firelight dance on the rim of his own goblet. "Garen Stoneheart, the Warden of the Northern Divide." "He is my master," Quiel whispered, the title tasting bitter. "He was your master," Fenwick corrected. "Now, he is a man who has damaged my property." Quiel stiffened, anger flaring through her fear. "I am not your property." Fenwick turned to her, and the smile on his face was terrifying. It wasn't a nice smile. It was sharp, predatory, and entirely devoid of human warmth. "You are in my kingdom, sleeping in my bed, healed by my healers. By the ancient laws of the gloom, you belong to me until the debt is paid. And considering the cost of the antidote Noravane had to brew to purge the wolfsbane from your blood, that debt is substantial." "Wolfsbane?" Quiel frowned, confused. "I wasn't poisoned. I was whipped." "The whip was coated in it," Fenwick said. His voice dropped an octave, losing its mocking edge. He walked toward her then, moving with that unnerving, gliding grace that made him seem more like smoke than flesh. He stopped at the foot of the bed. "Stoneheart didn't just want to hurt you, little bird. He wanted to ensure that if you escaped, you wouldn't survive to tell anyone what you saw." Quiel went cold. She remembered the papers she had found in Garen's study, the maps, the lists of names, vampire names, the plans for the mines beneath the gloom. "He's planning an invasion," she whispered. "He found a way to breach the mist." Fenwick's expression didn't change, but the fire in the grate suddenly roared, flaring up green and blue, casting long, monstrous shadows against the walls. I know. He reached out. Quiel flinched again, squeezing her eyes shut, bracing for the strike. She waited. It never came. She felt a cold finger hook under her chin, tilting her face up. She opened her eyes. Fenwick was leaning over her, close enough that she could smell the ozone and rain on his skin, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his purple irises. He wasn't looking at her throat. He was looking at the bruise on her cheekbone. "You have spirit," he murmured, his thumb brushing the skin just below her eye. The touch was freezing, yet it burned. Most humans would be weeping by now. You are calculating. You are already looking for the exits. "I'm surviving," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "Survival is a talent," he agreed. He dropped his hand, stepping back as if the contact burned him too. "Merelda will bring you food. Eat. Then dress. We have guests." "Guests?" "Lord Stoneheart has sent an emissary," Fenwick said, walking toward the heavy oak door. "He demands the return of his stolen thief. I intend to deliver his answer in person." "You're sending me back?" Quiel's heart stopped. The room spun. Fenwick paused at the door. He looked back over his shoulder, and for a second, the predator mask slipped, revealing something ancient, weary, and dangerously lonely. "I said I would deliver his answer," Fenwick said. "I didn't say the answer was yes." As Fenwick leaves, Quiel gets out of bed, her legs wobbling. She goes to the tall mirror in the corner. The bruise on her cheek is fading rapidly, faster than humanly possible. Watching it is like watching ink dissolve in water. She touches it and realizes the skin there feels different, harder, colder. The wolf's bane didn't just poison her, it interacted with something dormant in her blood. She isn't just healing, she is evolving. The dress Merelda brought was ridiculous. It was a gown of deep crimson velvet, heavy and lush, with a neckline that plunged daringly low and sleeves that trailed the floor like pools of blood. It was a dress for a queen, not a servant. "The king insists," Merelda said. She was a stout, older vampire with kind eyes and a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth that glinted when she smiled. She fussed over Kiel's hair, weaving obsidian pins into the dark tresses, pulling it away from her neck. "He says if you are to face a monster, you should look like a goddess. It confuses them." "He is the monster," Kiel muttered, flinching as Merelda tightened the corset. "Is he?" Merelda paused, her cold hands resting on Kiel's shoulders. "Garin Stoneheart broke your bones, child. Fenwick Hollowmere mended them. Learn to distinguish between the wolf that bites and the wolf that guards. The king has not had a guest in the East Tower in a century. Do not waste this protection." Quiel didn't argue. She let Merelda dress her, let her paint her lips the color of dried cherries. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. The frightened girl who scrubbed floors was gone. In her place was a woman who looked like she belonged in the shadows, a creature of the night herself. Hale Crestwater was waiting for her outside the door. The commander of the King's Guard was a towering wall of muscle and scarred tissue. He wore no helmet, revealing a face that had seen 1,000 battles and lost none of them. "Lady," he grunted, bowing his head slightly. "I am not a lady," Quiel said, smoothing the velvet of her skirt. "King says you sit at his right hand. That makes you a lady, or a target. Usually both." Hale gestured down the hall with a gauntleted hand. "Walk. Do not run. Do not show fear. The emissary is Ophira's brother. He smells fear like a shark smells blood in the water. Keep your eyes up." They descended the spiraling stairs into the great hall. It was set for a banquet, but there was no joy in the room. A long table of black wood stretched the length of the cavernous hall. At the head sat Fenwick, looking like a dark god on his throne. To his left sat a man Kiel recognized instantly, and the breath left her lungs. Not Garin, but his second-in-command, Silas, the man who held the whip while Garin gave the orders, the man who laughed. Silas was human, but he looked worse than the vampires. His skin was pockmarked and grey, his eyes beady and cruel. He was eating a rare steak with his fingers, grease running down his chin, wiping his hands on the pristine velvet tablecloth. When Kiel entered, silence descended like a guillotine. Every eye in the room, dozens of courtiers, guards and servants, snapped to her. Fenwick stood up. The movement was fluid, commanding. Silas choked on his meat. He stared at Kiel, his eyes bulging as if he were seeing a ghost. You cleaned her up. I polished the diamond you left in the mud, Fenwick said smoothly. He gestured to the chair at his right. Kiel, sit. She walked to the chair. Her legs felt like lead, but she kept her chin high, remembering Hale's warning. She felt the heat of Fenwick's gaze on her, burning and intense, acting as a physical barrier between her and Silas. She sat. My Lord Stoneheart demands her return, Silas said, wiping his hands and regaining his composure. She stole valuable documents. She stole a map, Fenwick corrected. He picked up his wineglass, swirling the thick crimson liquid. A map detailing the weak points in the Gloom's southern defences. Tell me, Silas, why does a human farmer need to know where my walls are thinnest? Silas sneered, leaning forward. That is not your concern, Leech. She is property. Hand her over, or Lord Stoneheart will burn this forest to the ground. He has new allies. Fenwick laughed. It was a dry, humourless sound that echoed off the stone walls. Garin threatens me with fire? How original. Does he think I am a scarecrow? She is a criminal. Silas slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. She is under my protection, Fenwick said. His voice dropped, vibrating through the wood of the table and into Kiel's bones. And she is sitting at my table. In my culture, that makes her family. Kiel looked at him, shocked. Family? The word hung in the air, foreign and heavy. Silas stood up, his hand going to the sword at his belt. Then you choose war. I choose justice, Fenwick said, his eyes flashing dangerous sparks. Suddenly, a woman spoke from the shadows. It was Ophira, a high-born vampire with hair like spun silver and eyes of ice. She had been watching silently from the corner, her presence a cold weight. My king, Ophira purred, stepping into the light. She looked at Kiel with pure loathing. Perhaps we should ask the human what she wants. Surely she prefers her own kind to us. We are monsters, are we not? Silas grinned crookedly at Kiel. Come here, girl. We'll forget the whipping. Just come home. Garin misses you. Kiel looked at Silas. She remembered the sound of the whip cracking, the smell of her own burning skin. She remembered the cage. Then she looked at Fenwick. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching Silas's hand on his sword hilt. He was coiled, a viper ready to strike. No, Kiel said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried in the silent hall. Silas's face twisted into a snarl. What did you say, bitch? I said no. Kiel stood up, her hands trembling. She grabbed the steak knife from her plate. Silver, heavy, sharp. I would rather die in this castle than live in yours. Silas roared and lunged across the table, drawing his sword. Fenwick moved. It was a blur of motion, too fast for the human eye to track. 1 second Silas was airborne. The next he was pinned against the stone wall, 3 feet off the ground. Fenwick had him by the throat. The king's other hand held Silas's sword, bent double like a twig. "You drew a weapon in my hall," Fenwick snarled, his fangs fully extended, glistening in the candlelight. "In front of my guest, in front of my queen." The court gasped. Even Fenwick seemed surprised by the word he had just used. No. Guest," Silas choked out, his face turning purple, his feet kicking uselessly. "She is the key." Fenwick froze. He loosened his grip slightly. "What did you say?" "The key," Silas gasped, a cruel, bloody smile spreading on his face. "Check her back." Fenwick looked back at Quiel. His eyes were wide, confused, fearful. "Quiel, turn around." "What?" Quiel gripped the knife tighter, backing away. "Turn around!" Fenwick roared, the command shaking the dust from the rafters. Terrified, Quiel turned her back to the room. The dress was low-cut in the back, designed to show off the skin she thought was scarred. A collective gasp went through the room. Even Hoyle took a step back, crossing himself. "Impossible," Ophira whispered, horror dawning on her face. Quiel felt a cold draft on her skin. "What? What is it?" Fenwick dropped Silas, who crumbled to the floor, gasping for air. The king walked slowly toward Quiel. He reached out, his trembling fingers tracing the air just above her skin, afraid to touch. "The lash marks," Fenwick whispered. "They are gone." "That's good, isn't it?" Quiel asked, trembling, looking over her shoulder. "No, Quiel," Fenwick said, and there was genuine, raw fear in his voice now. "The wounds are gone, but where the scars should be, there is text." Quiel rushes to a silver platter acting as a mirror. The skin on her back hasn't just healed. The scar tissue has formed intricate, raised lettering in an ancient, burning script. It isn't a random healing. The whip didn't just hurt her, it carved a spell into her flesh. She is not just a runaway servant. She is a living grimoire, and the text on her back is the Litany of Void, the spell to open the sealed gates of the vampiric underworld, a place even Fenwick fears to tread. The great hall had become a tomb of whispers. Every vampire present stared at Kiel's back, their eyes tracing the raised, jagged script that Stoneheart's whip had left behind. She felt naked, exposed not by the cut of her dress, but by the weight of their centuries-old hunger for power. Fenwick moved. He didn't run. He simply ceased to be in one spot and appeared in another, placing himself directly between Kiel and the court. He unclasped his heavy charcoal cloak and draped it over her shoulders, the silk warm from his body, shielding her scarred skin from their prying eyes. "The show is over," Fenwick said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble that vibrated in the chest. "Clear the room." "But my king!" Ophira protested, stepping closer, her gaze hungry. "If that is the Litany of Void, if she is the key, then she is a guest under my personal protection," Fenwick cut her off, his eyes flashing dangerous sparks of violet. "And anyone who looks at her with greed will lose their eyes." "Hail!" The commander stepped forward, hand on his sword. "Out, all of you." The court dispersed like smoke in a wind, leaving only Silas unconscious on the floor, Hale, and an older woman who had entered silently through a side door. She wore robes of moss green and smelled of dried herbs and soil. "Noravin," Fenwick said, turning to her. "Look at her. Do not touch. Just look." Quiel clutched the king's cloak, tighter around herself, trembling. "What is happening to me?" Noravin adjusted her spectacles and peered at Quiel's exposed back as Fenwick gently lifted the cloak. The old vampire hissed, drawing back. "Dark magic, Majesty," Noravin croaked. "Old magic. Stoneheart didn't just whip her. He used a ritual lash. He carved the incantation into her very life force." The scars aren't just healing, they are rooting. Rooting? Quiel asked, her voice hitching. The spell is feeding on you, child, Noravine said softly. It is using your blood to anchor itself to this reality. If we try to cut it out, it will kill you. If we try to erase it, it will kill you. Fenwick's hands clenched into fists at his sides. So she's a walking bomb. She's a walking door, Noravine corrected, and Garin Stoneheart holds the handle. Fenwick swore, a harsh, guttural sound in a language Kiel didn't understand. He turned to her, and for the first time, she saw true panic in his eyes. He reached out, cupping her face with both hands. His touch was freezing, yet it burned. I will not let him open you, Fenwick swore, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I will burn the world before I let him use you. Quiel looked up at him, searching his face. Why, I'm just a servant. No, Fenwick whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. You are the only thing in this castle that is warm, and I have been cold for a very long time. As they stand there, a pulse of black light ripples from Kiel's back. It doesn't hurt her, but across the room, the unconscious Silas screams in his sleep. The spell isn't just a door, it's a two-way mirror. Garin Stoneheart can see everything Kiel sees. For the next week, Kiel lived in the High Keep, the most secure section of the Obsidian Court. It was a lonely existence, punctuated only by visits from Merelda with food and Fenwick with books. He was trying to teach her. Not how to read, she knew that, but how to shield her mind. Think of a wall, Fenwick said, pacing the length of the library. Outside, snow fell in thick, silent sheets. Build it brick by brick. Stoneheart is watching through your eyes, Quiel. We must blind him. Quiel sat in a plush armchair, her eyes closed. It's hard. He's loud. His anger is always there, in the back of my head. Fenwick stopped pacing. He knelt beside her chair. Then focus on something else. Something louder than his anger. Like what? She opened her eyes. Like this. Fenwick took her hand. He placed it on his chest, right over his heart. It wasn't beating. It was a still, silent void. But as her palm rested there, a slow, heavy rhythm began. Thump, thump. You make it beat, Fenwick said softly, his gaze intense. It hasn't beaten in 300 years, Quiel. Focus on that sound. Let it be your wall. A flush rose in Quiel's cheeks. The intimacy of it was overwhelming. Here was the monster the villagers whispered about. The king of nightmares, kneeling at her feet, offering her his heartbeat as a shield. Why me? She asked again. Because you survived, he said simply. You broke into my court, bleeding and broken, and you didn't beg for your life. You demanded answers. Palomera says you have the soul of a queen, wrapped in the rags of a slave. Palomera, my oldest friend. She is arriving tonight. Fenwick stood, breaking the connection, though his hand lingered on hers for a moment. She is unique. She will help us break the tether. Palomera arrived at midnight. She was not a vampire, nor was she human. She was a lichen, a creature of fur and moonlight, trapped in a woman's form. She strode into the library, shaking snow from her hair, looking at Fenwick with amusement. So this is the little bird that woke the dead heart, Palomera grinned, her canines sharp. She circled Kiel, sniffing the air. She smells like thunderstorms and ozone. And rot. The mark, Fenwick said tightly. Palomera stopped behind Kiel's chair. She placed a warm, calloused hand on Kiel's shoulder. It's deep, Fen. Stoneheart didn't just write a spell. He invited a demon in, The text is shifting. It's trying to complete itself. Quiel shuddered. What happens if it completes itself? Palomera met Fenwick's eyes. Then the gates of the underworld open, and the first thing that comes out will be the hungry ghosts of every vampire you ever killed, Fenwick. Fenwick went still. I killed them to save this kingdom. The dead don't care about politics, Palomera said dryly. She looked at Quiel. We have to stop the writing. We need to ink over it. Counterspell it. With what? Quiel asked. With the blood of the one who holds the key, Palomera said. Your blood, Quiel, mixed with the blood of the king. As Palomera speaks, Quiel feels a burning sensation on her shoulder. She glances down. The text has moved. It's no longer just on her back. A single black character has crawled over her shoulder blade, visible on her collarbone. The spell is growing faster than they thought. It isn't waiting for Garen to open the door. It's trying to kick it down from the inside. The ritual was set for the new moon. Palomera spent days preparing the ingredients, while Hale doubled the guard. But tension in the castle was palpable. The vampires were restless. They could smell the magic radiating off Quiel, a siren song calling to their darkest instincts. Ophira was the worst. She circled the high keep like a shark, her smiles too sharp, her questions too probing. Is the human comfortable? She asked Fenwick one evening in the corridor. She looks pale. Perhaps she needs fresh air. She stays inside, Fenwick said, not stopping. You risk much for a mortal, my king, Ophira called after him. The council is whispering. They say you have been bewitched. They say the king is weak. Fenwick stopped. He turned slowly. Let them whisper. Lions do not lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. But the sheep had fangs. That night, Quiel woke to the sound of silence, the heartbeat she had learned to focus on. Fenwick's heartbeat, which she could now sense even through walls, had spiked, rapid and furious. Her door creaked open. It wasn't Fenwick, it was Silas. He had escaped the dungeons, and he wasn't alone. Ophira stood behind him, a smirk playing on her pale lips. Hello, Key, Silas rasped. He looked terrible, his skin grey, his eyes manic. Time to go home. Quiel scrambled back, reaching for the dagger Fenwick had given her. Get out! Ophira, Silas said, not taking his eyes off Quiel. Deal with the noise. Ophira raised a hand. A wall of silence slammed into the room. Quiel screamed, but no sound came out. The king is busy, Ophira said smoothly, examining her nails. A small uprising in the lower distracted him. Hale is indisposed. Silas lunged. Quiel slashed with the dagger, catching his arm, but he didn't even flinch. He grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. Garen is waiting, Silas hissed, pressing a cold, damp cloth over her face. He's very eager to finish his book. The world began to spin. Quiel fought, kicking and scratching, but Silas was unnaturally strong, enhanced by Ophira's magic. As her vision blurred, she saw the door explode inward. Not open. Explode. Wood and iron turned to shrapnel. Fenwick stood in the ruin of the doorway. He was covered in ash and blood, not all of it his. He didn't look human. He didn't even look like a vampire. He looked like a god of vengeance carved from shadow. Ophira, Fenwick said. The name wasn't spoken. It was a physical blow. The vampiress was thrown backward against the stone wall, bones cracking audibly. Silas froze, holding Quiel as a shield. One step, leech, and I snap her neck. Fenwick stopped. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. His eyes were entirely black, no white, no iris, just the void. Let her go, Fenwick said. She is the door, Silas screamed, tightening his grip. She belongs to the master. She belongs, Fenwick said. his voice changing, becoming multiple voices overlaid. To me. Shadows erupted from the floor. They weren't just shadows, they were physical tendrils of darkness. They wrapped around Silas's ankles, his wrists, his throat. He shrieked as they tore him away from Kiel, lifting him into the air. Kiel fell to the floor, gasping for air. She looked up. Fenwick was advancing on Silas, his claws extended, but Silas was laughing. "Too late! Look at her! It's too late!" Kiel looked down at her arms. The black text was racing down her skin like spilled ink. It covered her hands, her fingers. The air in the room ripped open. A sound like 1,000 screaming bells shattered the silence. The spell was complete. The text doesn't open a gate in the air. It opens a gate in Kiel. Her eyes roll back, turning purely white. She rises into the air, not by her own power. When she speaks, it isn't her voice. It is the voice of the first vampire, the progenitor Fenwick killed a millennium ago. And he looks at Fenwick and smiles. "Hello, son." The voice that spilled from Kiel's throat was not her own. It was a sound like grinding tectonic plates, ancient, heavy, and dripping with a malice that turned the marrow of Fenwick's bones to ice. It wasn't just a sound. It was a frequency that cracked the crystal goblets on the table and made the stained glass windows sing in terror. "Valerius," Fenwick whispered, the name tasting of copper blood and a betrayal 3 centuries old. He didn't attack. He couldn't. The monster floating before him wore the face of the woman who had restarted his heart. Her brown eyes were gone, replaced by a milky, churning white that looked like a blizzard trapped in a sphere. "You look well, boy," the entity, Valerius, the first vampire, sneered, tilting Kiel's head at an unnatural angle, testing the limits of the vertebrae. The sound of the neck popping echoed like a gunshot in the silent hall. "A bit soft around the edges, perhaps. Domesticated. I smell empathy on you. Disgusting." Kiel's body floated higher, the black script on her skin glowing with a sickly violet light. The room began to warp. The stone walls groaned as reality bent under the weight of the underworld bleeding through. Shadows didn't just lengthen. They detached from the walls, slithering across the floor like oil, seeking purchase. "Get out of her," Fenwick commanded, though his voice lacked its usual steel. He was terrified, not for himself, but for the fragile human vessel that was currently housing a god of destruction. "This is not your domain, Valerius. You are dust." "She is not her anymore," Valerius laughed, a sound that made the torches flare green. "She is the door, and I am the architect." Garin Stoneheart was a useful idiot to carve the key, a blunt instrument for a delicate task. But I am the one turning it. Did you think a simple human could channel this much power without burning out? I have been waiting in the ink, Fenwick, waiting for you to lower your guard. Across the room, Silas, who had been laughing, suddenly choked. The shadows Fenwick had previously wrapped him in were gone, evaporated by the sheer heat of Valerius's presence. But Silas wasn't free. He was frozen, his eyes bulging as invisible hands lifted him 2 feet off the floor. "And you," Valerius said, turning Kiel's white, blind eyes toward the traitor. "You reek of ambition without capability. You are the fuel." "Master!" Silas gasped, clawing at his own throat. "I served you. I brought her to—" "You brought me dinner," Valerius corrected. Silas screamed as he imploded. It wasn't quick. His skin turned grey, then black, as his life force was sucked instantly across the room and into the vortex, swirling around Kiel. He crumpled like a piece of paper thrown into a fire, leaving nothing but a pile of dust and empty clothes. The power surge hit the room like a physical shockwave, knocking Fenwick backward into the stone wall. "Kiel!" Fenwick roared, fighting the gale-force wind that was now tearing tapestries from the walls. "Listen to me! The wall! Build the wall!" Inside the maelstrom, Kiel was drowning in a sea of black ink. It wasn't wet, it was cold, a freezing, viscous darkness that filled her lungs, her mind, her soul. It whispered to her in 1,000 voices, telling her she was nothing, a slave, a victim, a vessel. It showed her memories of every time she had been hurt, every time she had been powerless, trying to convince her that surrender was the only peace. "Give up," the ink murmured. "Sleep. We will carry the burden." But through the roar of the void, she heard him. Thump, thump, the heartbeat. It wasn't just a sound, it was a tether, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. She grabbed onto it in the darkness, wrapping her consciousness around that steady, artificial rhythm. She remembered the warmth of his cloak, the smell of cedar and rain, the way he had looked at her not as a tool, but as a person. Fenwick. Her voice cracked through Valerius's baritone, a singular note of humanity in a symphony of monsters. The first vampire snarled, Quiel's face twisting in annoyance. "She fights, how quaint, like a mouse biting a lion." The double doors burst open. Palomera charged into the room, Hale right behind her, his sword drawn. They skidded to a halt at the sight of the hovering girl and the vortex of violet energy tearing the room apart. "The ink is alive!" Palomera shouted over the wind, her lichen eyes widening. "Fenwick, we have to overwrite it now. If he fully manifests, she's gone. He will burn her soul to ash to fuel his return." "I can't get close!" Fenwick yelled, shielding his face from flying debris, chunks of stone and glass that were orbiting Kiel like a deadly asteroid belt. "You don't need to get close to her body." Palomera ripped an obsidian dagger from her belt and threw it to him. "You need to get close to her soul. The blood bond. Do it!" Fenwick caught the dagger. A blood bond was forbidden for a reason. It didn't just connect two minds. It fused them. It created a bridge that death could cross. If she died while they were linked, his soul would be dragged into the void with hers. He looked at the woman floating in the center of the storm, the woman who had challenged him, saved him, and somehow learned to love the monster he thought he was. He didn't hesitate. He slashed his own palm, the dark, thick blood welling up instantly. "Kiel!" he shouted, extending his bleeding hand toward the storm, ignoring the wind that threatened to flay the skin from his bones. "I am here! Let me in!" Quiel manages to regain control of her right hand for a split second. The ink recedes from her fingers, just enough for her to grip the hilt of the spectral dagger Valerius had conjured. She doesn't reach for Fenwick. She turns the blade inward. She knows that to kill the monster, the host must die. She aims the blade at her own heart. "No!" Fenwick moved faster than time. He caught the blade millimeters from her chest, the obsidian edge slicing deep into his own fingers. His blood, ancient, potent, kingly, dripped onto the black script carved into her skin. The reaction was nuclear. Gold light exploded from the point of contact, warring with the violet darkness. Kiel screamed, a dual sound of human agony and demonic rage. The blast blew the roof off the high keep. They fell together, crashing onto the stone floor, the storm above them raging into the night sky. Fenwick pinned her down, not with strength, but with weight. "I will not let you die," he snarled, his eyes burning into hers. "You do not get to leave me." "He's too strong," Quiel gasped, her eyes flickering between brown and milky white. "He is a memory," Fenwick said fiercely. "I am the king, and you are my queen." He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a transfer of power. He poured his vitality, his centuries of strength, directly into her. The gold light intensified, racing along the black scars, burning the ink away. Above them, the sky tore open. Not a portal to the underworld, but a breach in the castle's defences. Ropes dropped. Men descended. Garin Stoneheart had arrived. He landed on the debris-strewn floor, clad in iron armour, a repeater crossbow aimed at Fenwick's back. He looked wild, consumed by his own obsession. "Step away from the weapon, leech!" Garin shouted. Fenwick broke the kiss, lifting his head. His mouth was stained with blood, his and hers. He looked at Garin, and the temperature in the room plummeted to absolute 0. "You," Fenwick whispered. "She is mine," Garin ranted, advancing. "I wrote her. I made her." "You made a mistake," Quiel said. Garin froze. Quiel sat up, Fenwick helping her. The black script on her skin was gone. In its place were scars of shimmering gold. Her eyes were her own, but they held a new, terrifying depth. "Valerius is gone," Quiel said, her voice steady. "But he left the door open, and I decide who goes through it." Garin fired the crossbow. Quiel didn't flinch. She raised a hand. The bolt stopped in mid-air, then turned to dust. "You treated me like a thing," Quiel said, standing up. Fenwick stood with her, a shadow to her light. "You carved your hate into my back. Now, you can have it back." She flicked her wrist. The golden scars on her arms flared. Garin screamed as black ink began to manifest on his skin. The curse was rebounding. The author was becoming the book. "No, no!" Garin clawed at his face as the script covered him. "I am the warden. I am—" The ink doesn't just cover Garin. It consumes him. He doesn't die. He is folded. His body twists and flattens, compressing until there is nothing left on the floor but a single, leather-bound book. He wanted to write a story of power? He became one. The silence that followed was heavy. The wind died down. The snow drifted in through the ruined roof, settling on the book that used to be Garin Stoneheart. Fenwick stared at the book, then at Quiel. He looked exhausted, his skin translucent, his immortal reserves drained by the bond. "Is it over?" he asked softly. Quiel looked at her hands. The gold scars were fading, settling into faint, silvery lines. "The voices are gone. The cold is gone." She turned to him. He was swaying. "Fenwick!" She caught him as he collapsed. Hale and Palomera rushed forward, but Quiel waved them back. She sat on the floor, cradling the Vampire King's head in her lap. "You gave me too much," she whispered, brushing the hair from his forehead. "I gave you what was yours," Fenwick rasped. He smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "I told you, I would burn the world." "You burned the curse," she corrected. "Close enough." His eyes fluttered shut. "No," Quiel said. "You don't get to sleep yet." "Noravain!" The healer scrambled over the rubble. She checked Fenwick's pulse, then looked up, grim. "He emptied his vessel, my lady, to overwrite the First's magic. He gave up his immortality." Quiel froze. "What?" "He is not dead," Noravain said rapidly. "But the power that kept him ageless, it is in you now. He is just a man. A dying man." Quiel looked down at the king. The fear that gripped her was worse than any demon. She looked at the silver lines on her skin, his power. "Can I give it back?" Quiel asked. "No," Palomera said gently. "Energy flows one way." Quiel looked at the sunrise beginning to bleed over the jagged peaks outside. The first rays of light were hitting the tower. For 300 years, Fenwick had burned in the sun. "He saved me," Quiel said. "He caught me." She leaned down. She whispered into his ear. "Wake up, Fenwick. The sun is coming up, and you're going to want to see this." She placed her hand over his heart. It was silent. She closed her eyes and pushed, not magic, not blood, but pure, stubborn will. She remembered the rhythm he had taught her. Thump. Thump. Beat, she commanded. Nothing. Beat, damn you! Tears fell onto his face. A shudder ran through him, a gasp. Fenwick's eyes snapped open. They weren't purple anymore. They were a startling, clear green. He took a jagged breath. He looked up at her, then past her, at the sunlight creeping across the floor. He flinched, instinctively trying to cover his face. "It's okay," Quiel whispered, holding his hands down. "Look." The light touched his hand. It didn't burn. It warmed. Fenwick stared at his hand, then at the sun. Tears welled in his human eyes. He looked back at Quiel, awe written on every feature. "It's warm," he whispered. "Yes," Quiel smiled, leaning down to kiss him. A kiss of promise, of morning, of a new life. "It's warm." As they embrace in the sunlight, Merelda picks up the book that is Garin Stoneheart to throw it into the fire. But she pauses. The cover of the book vibrates. It isn't finished. The story inside is rewriting itself. She decides to lock it in the deepest vault of the library. Some stories aren't meant to be ended. They are meant to be warnings. They say the gloom is no longer a place of eternal night. They say a king sits on the obsidian throne who walks in the daylight, and a queen sits beside him who carries the stars in her skin. Fenwick and Quiel rebuilt the court, not as a fortress of fear, but as a sanctuary for the broken. They didn't fix the world, but they fixed each other. And in the end, that was the only kingdom that mattered. They walked the line between the sun and the shadow, proving that even monsters can be saved, and even victims can wear crowns. Enjoyed this romantic saga? If Quiel and Fenwick's story stole your heart, please like this story and share it with your fellow romantics. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of forbidden love, dangerous magic, and happy endings that are earned, not given. Let me know in the comments. Would you have opened the book?